The simple woman walked into the room and said to the arrogant CEO, "I am the new owner of the company." Today, this story is not about power. It's about what happens when a simple woman walks into a company, faces an arrogant CEO, and discovers that moment was planned by a man who, even in his absence, would change the destiny of 3 people forever. 8:47 in the morning, 32nd floor of the most impressive building in Manhattan. Headquarters of the Harrington Group. The conference room seemed designed to intimidate any ordinary human being. A polished mahogany table that reflected the tense faces of executives. Italian leather chairs aligned with perfect precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the city as if saying, "All of this is ours." And at the center of that corporate stage, occupying the head of the table as if he had been born there, was Michael Harrington. 37 years old, hair impeccably slicked back, navy blue suit tailored to perfection, Swiss watch on his left wrist, and a smile that clearly said, "I know I'm better than you." "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, placing his hands on the table like a general about to command a battle. "The numbers from last quarter were exceptional. And when I say exceptional, I mean we exceeded all expectations." Again. The executives nodded in unison, as if they were puppets programmed to agree. One of them, a gray-haired gentleman named Henderson, even let out a little laugh of approval that sounded strangely rehearsed. "Brilliant, Mr. Harrington," said Henderson. "Absolutely brilliant." Michael smiled. It was the kind of smile he practiced in the mirror every morning, right after checking if he was still as handsome as the day before. "Thank you, Henderson, but you don't need to flatter me." He paused dramatically. "At least not in front of everyone." Contained laughter spread through the room. It was the boss's joke. Everyone knew they needed to laugh. Seated to Michael's left, in a strategically less important position, was Daniel Harrington, 33 years old. Legal director. The younger brother no one remembered existed during important meetings. Daniel watched the scene with an expression that mixed boredom and resignation. He had seen this ego show so many times he could recite the lines from memory. The same speech, the same jokes, the same synchronized applause. "This quarter," Michael continued, now gesturing as if conducting an orchestra, "we will expand our operations to the West Coast. And when I say expand, I mean dominate." More nods, more forced smiles. Henderson wrote everything down on his tablet as if recording the words of a prophet. That was when the conference room door opened, not forcefully, not dramatically. It simply opened, as if the person on the other side had every right to enter. And she entered. A woman, 28 years old, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, white blouse with no visible brand, dark jeans, low-heeled shoes, simple and practical. In her hands, just a brown leather folder, ordinary and without any show. The silence that settled was almost physical. The executives looked at her as if an alien had just landed in the middle of the meeting. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, with a tone that made it clear helping was the last thing he intended to do. The woman didn't respond immediately. She walked to the opposite side of the table, her steps echoing on the marble floor as if each one was a statement of intent. "Excuse me," tried Michael's secretary, a blonde woman who appeared at the door completely out of breath. "Mr. Harrington," I tried to stop her, but she simply walked right past, and— "It's all right, Martha," Michael interrupted, without taking his eyes off the intruder. "Clearly we have a visitor who doesn't quite understand how things work around here." The woman finally stopped. She looked around the room, observing each face, each expression of contempt, each look of superiority. And then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled. "Good morning," she said, with a calm and steady voice. "My name is Claire Whitman." Michael tilted his head slightly to the side, like a cat observing a particularly interesting mouse. "Claire Whitman," he repeated, savoring the name as if it were something exotic. "And what exactly is Miss Whitman doing in my conference room, interrupting my presentation, in my company?" He emphasized each possessive pronoun with almost visible pleasure. Claire wasn't shaken. In fact, her smile widened a little. "I am the new owner of this company." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. And then came the laughter. Henderson was the first, a loud laugh that he tried to disguise as a cough. Then came Thompson, the financial director, with a muffled chuckle. Soon the entire room was filled with contained smiles, exchanged glances, and that particular atmosphere that arises when powerful people decide to mock someone they consider insignificant. Michael clapped slowly. 1, 2, 3 times. "Brilliant," he said, genuinely amused. "Is this some kind of prank? Some hidden camera show?" He looked around, pretending to search for cameras. "Because if it is, I must say the production is very good. This actress is convincing." "I'm not an actress," Claire responded, still calm. "And it's not a prank." "Oh, of course it's not." Michael crossed his arms. "Let me guess, you're a new employee who got lost? An intern, perhaps? The Human Resources Department is 3 floors down, dear, and the cafeteria is on the 2nd. More laughter. Henderson was practically squirming with joy. Claire took a step forward. "Mr. Harrington, if you could just examine these documents." "Enough." Michael cut her off, raising his hand as if swatting away an insect. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a calculated coldness. "This has gone beyond the limits of entertainment." He pressed a button on the panel built into the table. "Security, I need 2 men in the main conference room, now." Claire blinked, but didn't back down. "Mr. Harrington, I really think you should see." "What I think?" Michael interrupted her again, rising from his chair with the authority of someone whose orders had never been questioned, "is that you have exactly 30 seconds to leave this room before you are escorted out of the building. And depending on my mood, maybe I'll even consider not filing a complaint for trespassing on private property." The executives watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Henderson already had his phone in hand, probably ready to film the humiliation. That was when Daniel stood up. "Michael," he said with a calm but firm voice. "Wait." All eyes turned to the younger brother, including Michael's, who seemed genuinely surprised. Daniel rarely spoke in meetings, and never ever contradicted him in public. "What is it, Daniel?" Michael asked, with a tone that mixed irritation and curiosity. Daniel looked at Claire. There was something about her that he couldn't quite define. A familiarity. A feeling that he had seen that face before, that posture, that unshakable calm. "Let her show the documents," Daniel said. "What's the problem? If it's fraud, our legal department can resolve it in 5 minutes. If it's a prank, we laugh and move on. But if it's true..." He left the sentence hanging in the air. Michael let out a dry laugh. "If it's true? Daniel, are you listening to what you're saying? A woman appears out of nowhere, walks into our meeting uninvited, and you want me to take this seriously?" "I want you to act like a professional," Daniel responded, holding his brother's gaze. "Calling security without at least verifying the documents could be hasty." The word hung in the air like a silent challenge. Michael narrowed his eyes. He didn't like being contradicted. Even less so by his younger brother, in front of the entire board. But Daniel was right. And deep down, Michael knew it. "Cancel security," he said to Martha, who was still standing at the door. "For now." The secretary nodded and left quickly, relieved to escape that tension. Michael turned to Claire, arms crossed. "Very well, Miss Whitman. My brother here seems to believe your papers deserve attention. So let's see what you have." Claire looked briefly at Daniel. Something passed between them, a silent recognition, an unspoken thank you. She opened the folder and slid the documents across the mahogany table. Michael picked up the papers with his fingertips, as if they might contaminate him. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. "I bet it's some kind of..." His voice died. Michael's eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then went back to the first, as if he needed to confirm what he had just read. The arrogant smile disappeared. The color of his face changed subtly. Henderson, noticing the change, stopped laughing. "Mr. Harrington?" he asked, hesitant. "Is everything all right?" Michael didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on a specific line in the document, a signature. A signature he knew very well, because he had spent his entire life trying to live up to it. The signature of the founder of the Harrington Group. The signature of his own father. Daniel leaned forward, trying to see what had caused that reaction in his brother. Michael, the unshakable. Michael, the arrogant. Michael, who never showed weakness. Now it seemed like someone had just pulled the rug out from under his feet. "This," Michael began, his voice faltering for the first time in years. "This isn't possible." Claire remained silent. There was no need for words. The documents spoke for themselves. The silence in the room was so dense it seemed to have its own weight. The executives looked at each other, confused, not understanding what was happening. Henderson stretched his neck trying to read the papers, but Michael held them tightly, as if they were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Daniel finally managed to see part of the content, and what he saw made his heart race. A will, specific clauses, and Claire Whitman's name highlighted in clear and unmistakable letters. Michael swallowed hard. This needs to be verified. It needs to be authenticated. It already has been, Claire interrupted gently, 3 times, by different offices. They all reached the same conclusion. Michael raised his eyes from the papers and looked at Claire for the first time. Not with arrogance, not with contempt, but with something that looked a lot like fear. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Claire held his gaze without wavering. "I already told you. My name is Claire Whitman, and as of today, this company belongs to me." Daniel watched the scene in silence, but his mind was elsewhere. Her voice, her manner, something he couldn't explain. And then, like a flash of memory crossing an entire decade, he felt it, a distant memory. A night he believed he had forgotten forever. Could it be possible? And in that moment, while silence swallowed the conference room on the 32nd floor, something much bigger than a simple transfer of ownership began to unfold. A story that had begun 10 years earlier. A story that was just beginning again. 10 years before, Boston University campus. An 18-year-old girl carried 3 huge books, a heavy backpack, and the biggest smile that dormitory had ever seen. Her name was Claire Whitman, and this was officially the best day of her life. "Mom, I did it," Claire shouted into the phone, balancing the books with her chin while trying to open the room door. "Full scholarship. They pay for everything. Everything, Mom." On the other end of the line, her mother was crying so much that Claire could barely understand the words. "My baby, my daughter, at university. Mom, are you okay? I'm emotional." Her mother's voice cracked. "Your father is here crying too, but he's pretending it's allergies." "I'm not crying." Her father's voice sounded in the background. "It's the pollen. It's September, dear," her mother responded. "Autumn pollen." Claire laughed, feeling her eyes sting. Her family didn't have much. The house was small, the car was old, and vacations usually meant a barbecue in the backyard. But love they had plenty of. "I'm going to make you proud of me," Claire said, her voice choked up. "I promise." "Daughter," her father took the phone, "we're already proud. Since the day you were born. Now go there and show those rich folks how it's done." Claire hung up the phone and looked around the dormitory. The room was tiny. 2 beds, 2 closets, a window overlooking the parking lot. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet. Perfect. She had exactly 45 minutes to get ready, find the administration building, and not get lost. Simple, right? Wrong. 40 minutes later, Claire was completely lost. "Excuse me," she stopped a boy passing by. "Do you know where the administration building is?" The boy looked at her as if she had asked where the moon was. "Administration? Like the course?" "Yes, the building, where the classes are." "Oh." He scratched his head. "I'm in philosophy. We don't know where anything is. It's part of the course." Claire blinked. "Was that a joke?" "Honestly, I don't even know anymore." She kept walking. The campus was huge. Red brick buildings, century-old trees, students walking in all directions with coffee in enormous cups and laptops under their arms. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Except Claire. "Excuse me," she tried again, this time with a blonde girl carrying a bag that probably cost the equivalent of her parents' house rent for 3 months. "Do you know where?" "I don't talk to freshmen." The girl cut her off, without even looking at her. Claire stood there, mouth open. "How do you know I'm a freshman?" The girl finally looked. She analyzed Claire from head to toe. The simple sneakers, the basic jeans, the functional backpack. "Honey," she said with a smile that was anything but friendly, "it's written on your forehead." And she walked away. Claire took a deep breath, counted to 10, then to 20. "All right," she muttered to herself. "Friendly people. I love friendly people." She finally found the administration building, late, sweaty, and slightly traumatized, but she found it. The classroom was a huge auditorium. At least 100 students were already seated, all looking much more prepared than she felt. Claire found a spot in the back, trying to appear invisible. "First class?" a voice asked next to her. Claire turned, a red-headed girl with a genuine smile. "Is it that obvious? You're holding your notebook upside down." Claire looked. The notebook was in fact upside down. Oh, that explains why the spiral was poking me. The girl laughed. I'm Melissa, also a freshman. Also terrified. Can we be terrified together? Claire smiled for the first time since leaving the dormitory. Claire? And yes, please. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Claire quickly discovered that the university was a divided world. On one side, students who had everything: new cars, off-campus apartments, designer clothes, parties every week. On the other, scholarship students like her, who balanced studies with part-time jobs and counted every penny. She got a job at the campus cafeteria. 4 hours a day, Monday through Friday, serving coffee and sandwiches to the same classmates who ignored her in class. A cappuccino with almond milk, extra foam, cinnamon on top, but not too much cinnamon, just a touch. And if you could make it in a heart shape, that would be perfect, ordered a boy Claire recognized from statistics class. She looked at him. Do you want a coffee or a work of art? The boy blinked, confused. It's just that at my favorite cafe in Manhattan, they make it like that. This is Boston, and I make $8 an hour. You're going to get a circle, and you're going to like it. Melissa, who was in line behind him, almost choked from laughing so hard. The boy took his circle-shaped coffee and left muttering something about customer service. You're going to get fired, Melissa said, still laughing. Probably, Claire agreed, but it was worth it. She didn't get fired. In fact, the cafeteria manager, a lady named Mrs. Mary, loved the story when she heard it. These boys need someone to put them in their place, Mrs. Mary said, patting Claire on the shoulder. Keep it up. Claire kept it up. In classes, she stood out, not for being the smartest, but for being the most dedicated. While other students skipped class to recover from parties, Claire was in the front row, notebook open, pen in hand. The introduction to business professor, a white-haired gentleman named Dr. Morrison, noticed. Miss Whitman, he said after a particularly complex class on market analysis, your answer was the most elaborate in the class. Claire felt her face heat up. Thank you, Professor. You work, don't you? I saw you at the cafeteria. Yes, sir, part-time. Dr. Morrison nodded with genuine respect in his eyes. Keep it up. The world needs more people who know the value of hard work. Claire left that class floating. But not everything was easy. There were nights when she stayed up late, trying to finish assignments while listening to parties happening in the neighboring dormitories. There were moments when she saw groups of friends going to the mall, to the movies, to restaurants, while she counted coins to buy a package of instant noodles. There were days when loneliness weighed heavy. Are you okay? Melissa asked one night, finding Claire sitting on the bench in front of the dormitory staring at nothing. I am, Claire responded automatically. Lie. Claire sighed. It's just that sometimes I wonder if I belong in this place, you know? Everyone seems so fitted in, and I feel like a puzzle piece that was put in the wrong box. Melissa sat next to her. You want to know something? I feel like that too. My parents took out a huge loan to send me here. Every time I get a low grade, I think about their sacrifice, and I want to disappear. Claire looked at her friend. Why did you never tell me this? Because you seem so strong all the time. I didn't want to seem weak. Melissa, Claire said, with a half smile, I fake it really well. It's a talent. The two laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from the relief of discovering you're not alone. You know what we need? Melissa said suddenly. A raise? Besides that, we need to go out. Do something fun. There's a huge party happening this weekend. Everyone's going. Claire wrinkled her nose. Parties aren't really my thing. Why? You don't know how to dance? I know how to dance. The problem is my dancing looks like a chicken having a fit. Melissa burst out laughing. Perfect. Mine looks like a malfunctioning robot. Let's be disasters together. Claire thought for a moment. She had spent weeks studying, working, surviving. Maybe a night of fun wasn't such a bad idea. All right, she gave in. One party, just one. Melissa celebrated. You won't regret it. Claire had no way of knowing at that moment, but that party would change absolutely everything. On the other side of campus, exactly 800 meters from where Claire and Melissa were planning their night of fun, a 23-year-old young man stared at the bathroom mirror as if he were about to face a tribunal. His name was Daniel Harrington, and he hated parties. You've been in there for 20 minutes, his roommate's voice came from the other side of the door. What are you doing? Growing roots? Daniel sighed. I'm preparing myself mentally. For a party, you just drink, dance, and make questionable choices. No mental preparation needed. You don't know the Kappa fraternity parties, Daniel responded. Their mental preparation is a matter of survival. He looked at his own reflection. Brown hair slightly messy. Dark circles that betrayed weeks of sleepless nights. And in his eyes, that specific tiredness of someone in their last semester of law school who had already read more pages of legislation than any human being should read in an entire lifetime. Last semester. The two words that should mean relief, but that weighed like a sentence. Daniel Harrington was the youngest son of the Harrington family, which, in theory, should mean freedom. In practice, it meant being constantly compared to his older brother, Michael Harrington, the prodigy, the perfect firstborn. The guy who had graduated in business with honors was already working at the family company, and probably slept hugging an Employee of the Month trophy that he himself had invented. Your brother had already closed 3 international contracts at your age, his father would say during family dinners. Your brother never got less than an A, his mother would add, as if Daniel needed more reasons to want to hide under the table. Daniel's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen and felt his stomach turn. A message from his father. Heard the Kappa party is today. It's your last semester, son. Take the opportunity to have some fun. And Senator Williams' son will be there. Great opportunity to make connections before you graduate. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. Even fun came with instructions. Have some fun. Followed by, make connections. Classic. His father was incapable of suggesting anything without turning it into a task. Are you coming out, or am I going to have to break down this door? The roommate asked again. I'm coming, Marcus. Daniel opened the door. Marcus, an engineering student with a natural talent for never taking anything seriously, was leaning against the wall with an amused expression. Wow, Marcus said, analyzing Daniel. You look like someone going to a funeral, not a party. Maybe it's the funeral of my mental sanity. Dramatic, I like it. My dad sent a message telling me to have fun in my last semester, Daniel explained, putting away his phone. Translation, go to the party, network, and don't embarrass me. Marcus shook his head. Your dad is intense. You have no idea. The two left the dormitory and walked toward the fraternity. The sound of music could already be heard from afar, a deep beat that made the floor shake. Relax, Marcus said, slapping Daniel on the shoulder. It's going to be fun. You remember what fun is, right? Vaguely. I think I had it once, a few years ago. Marcus laughed. Your problem is you think too much. Tonight, no thinking, just existing. You sound like one of those motivational gym posters. Thank you. I practice in front of the mirror. The fraternity house was organized chaos. Cups everywhere, people dancing in every available corner, and a haze of mixed perfumes that formed a scent that could only be described as imminent regret. Daniel had barely entered when a hand landed on his shoulder. Harrington. He turned around. Tyler Williams, the senator's son, was standing there with a smile that seemed rehearsed for campaign photos. Tyler, Daniel greeted, trying to seem enthusiastic. Long time. Man, I was just talking about you. My dad really wants to meet the youngest Harrington son. Says you're a promising family. Daniel almost choked. Promising. As if they were a startup, not people. That's great, he said, with a smile that hurt from being so forced. By the way, Tyler continued, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret, I heard your brother closed $1 million contract last week. Man, what a machine. You must be proud. Very, Daniel responded. I wake up every day thinking about my brother's achievements. It's what motivates me to get out of bed. The sarcasm went completely unnoticed by Tyler. That's so inspiring, man. United family, you know? That's what makes the difference. Marcus, who had observed the entire interaction, waited for Tyler to walk away before commenting. Is that guy real? He seems like a character from a soap opera. Welcome to my world, Daniel muttered, where everyone seems like a soap opera character, and I'm the extra who didn't receive the script. The night continued with Daniel doing exactly what was expected of him, shaking hands, smiling at people he didn't know, and pretending to be interested in conversations about internships at law firms and family connections. It was exhausting. At some point, he managed to escape to the backyard, seeking a moment of silence. The fresh air was like a gift. Also running away? A voice asked. Daniel turned around. A guy he didn't recognize was sitting on a bench, holding a cup. Something like that, Daniel responded. I'm Jake, economics major, and I hate these parties with all my soul. Daniel smiled for the first time that night. Daniel, law, last semester, and the feeling is mutual. Let me guess, Jake said. Rich family, enormous expectations, and you're here because someone sent a message telling you to have fun, but actually meant make useful connections. Daniel blinked. That was frighteningly accurate. I have the same father, just an accountant version. Jake, the son of the financial director of such and such company, will be there. Take advantage of your last year to make strategic friendships. Strategic friendships, Daniel repeated. That should be the motto of a dysfunctional family. I suggested putting it in Latin on the family crest, but nobody thought it was funny. The two laughed. It was nice to find someone who understood. But the peace didn't last long. A group of guys came out of the house toward the garden, visibly intoxicated. Daniel recognized one of them. Brad Mitchell, captain of the lacrosse team and owner of an ego the size of the university stadium. Look who's here, Brad said with a smile that was anything but friendly. The little Harrington prince. Daniel felt his body tense. Brad, heard your brother is killing it in the business world. Must be hard being second place in the family, right? Especially now that you're graduating and will have to compete for real. I didn't know you followed my brother's career, Daniel responded, keeping his voice calm. Fan club? Brad's smile faltered. Watch your mouth, Harrington. Watch yours, Jake intervened, getting up from the bench. The night is pleasant, no need to ruin it. Brad looked at Jake as if he had just noticed his existence. And who are you? His defense lawyer? Not yet, but if you keep talking, I might consider the offer. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Brad's friends approached, forming a kind of semicircle. Daniel knew this type of situation. He knew the best thing was to get out of there before things escalated. Let's go, he said to Jake. It's not worth it. That's right, Brad provoked. Run, Harrington. It's what you do best, isn't it? Running from your brother's shadow. Daniel stopped. He should have kept walking. He should have ignored it. But something about that phrase, that night, after months of pressure and comparisons and suffocating expectations, made something inside him simply break. You know what your problem is, Brad? Daniel turned around, his voice firmer than he expected. You spend so much time trying to put others down that you never realized you yourself have never done anything relevant. The only reason anyone knows your name is because you play lacrosse. And when you graduate, you'll discover that nobody cares about lacrosse. The silence that followed was deafening. Brad's face turned red. The first push came too fast for Daniel to react. Then everything became chaos. Screams, bodies colliding, cups being knocked over. Daniel tried to get away, but was pulled into the confusion. Someone hit him in the face. He tasted metal in his mouth. He tried to get up, but was pushed again. When he finally managed to escape, he had a cut lip, a torn shirt, and trembling hands. He walked away from the party stumbling, the sound of music still echoing behind him. His face throbbed. His legs felt like they were made of jelly. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emptiness he felt inside. 23 years trying to do everything right. 23 years being the perfect son, the exemplary student, the brother who never complained. And in the end, he was still just second place. The one nobody noticed. The one nobody chose. Daniel leaned against a tree and let his body slide down to the ground. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to control the tears that insisted on escaping. He didn't know how long he stayed there. But at some point, he heard footsteps approaching. Claire Whitman had a golden rule in life: never get involved in problems that weren't hers. A rule she was about to break spectacularly. Hey, are you okay? The boy leaning against the tree raised his eyes. Even in the dim light, Claire could see the swollen lip, the torn shirt, and that look of someone who had just lost a battle they never asked to fight. I'm great, he responded, his voice hoarse. Just resting, hugging nature, connecting with my roots, literally. You're hurt, Claire said. This? He touched his lip and grimaced. This is just an accessory. It's in fashion. Swollen lips are in fashion? In Paris, definitely. Claire couldn't help but half smile. The guy was clearly in bad shape, but still trying to make jokes. That said something about him. She looked around. The party continued in full swing a few meters away, the sound of music drowning out any other noise. People came and went, laughing, stumbling, completely oblivious to the injured boy in the garden. "What happened?" Claire asked, crouching beside him. "Difference of opinion." "About what?" "About whether I should keep my face intact. Apparently, we lost consensus." Claire sighed. She had come to the party against her will, dragged by Melissa, who had disappeared in the first 15 minutes to go to the bathroom and never came back. Now, instead of looking for her friend, she was crouching beside a sarcastic stranger with a tendency to hug trees. "Can you get up?" she asked. "Theoretically, yes. In practice." He tried to move and groaned. "Maybe not." "Did someone kick you?" "No, I tripped while strategically fleeing the confusion. I think I twisted my ankle, or broke it, still deciding." "Are you always this dramatic?" "Only when I'm hurt, humiliated, and sitting on the ground of an unknown garden talking to a stranger who, by the way, still hasn't introduced herself." Claire blinked. He was right. "Claire," she said. "My name is Claire." "Daniel," he responded. "Nice to meet you, Claire. Sorry for not shaking your hand, but if I move now, I think I'll pass out." "Please don't pass out. I don't know how to do CPR." "Technically, passing out doesn't require CPR. Are you a medical student?" "Law. Last semester. But I've watched a lot of hospital shows." Claire laughed. It was impossible not to laugh. "All right, law student," she said, standing up. "Let's do this. I'm going to help you get up, and you're going to try not to pass out, scream, or do anything dramatic. That really limits my options. Take it or leave it." Daniel considered for a moment. "Take it." Claire extended her hand. Daniel held it, and with a joint effort that involved groans, grimaces, and at least 3 words that Claire pretended not to hear, he managed to stand up. "Wow," he said, leaning on her. "The world is spinning. That's normal after a fight. Or I have a concussion." "You don't have a concussion." "How do you know?" "Because people with concussions don't make so many bad jokes." That was offensive. "My jokes are excellent." They began to slowly move away from the tree when a voice cut through the air. "Look at that. The little prince is still here." Claire felt Daniel tense beside her. She turned and saw a group of 4 guys approaching. The one leading the group was big, muscular, and had the type of smile that didn't promise anything good. "Brad?" Daniel muttered. "Friend of yours?" Claire asked quietly. "The opposite of that." Brad stopped a few meters from them, crossing his arms. "Thought you had run away, Harrington. But you were just hiding behind a girl?" "I'm not hiding," Daniel responded, trying to stay steady despite his ankle. "I'm taking a strategic break." "Strategic break," Brad repeated, laughing. His friends laughed along, like a well-trained audience. "That's good. Very good." Claire took a step forward. "Look, we don't want trouble. We're leaving." Brad looked at her as if he had just noticed her existence. "And who are you? His girlfriend?" "I'm someone who has better things to do than stand here listening to you talk." Brad's smile faltered. "Brave girl." "Girl in a hurry," Claire corrected. "Excuse me." She tried to pass, but one of Brad's friends blocked the way. "Nobody said you could leave." Claire's heart raced. She looked around. The party continued, but nobody was paying attention to them. They were too far away, hidden by the garden shadows. "Daniel," she whispered, "can you run? I can barely walk." "Great. Just great." Brad took another step toward them. "You know, Harrington, I'm not done talking to you." "Funny," Daniel said, "because I'm already done listening." "You really don't know when to stay quiet, do you?" Claire made a decision. She pulled her phone from her pocket, and before anyone could react, dialed her father's number. "What are you doing?" Brad asked. "Calling the police," Claire lied with the firmest voice she could muster. Brad hesitated. It was only a second, but it was enough. "Dad," Claire said as soon as the call was answered. "I need you to come pick me up, now, on campus, near the Kappa fraternity. It's urgent." "Claire? What happened?" Her father's voice sounded worried on the other end. "Please, Dad, hurry." She hung up. Brad and his friends exchanged glances. "You called Daddy?" Brad mocked. "How cute." "My dad is an Army veteran," Claire said, improvising, "and he doesn't like it when strangers bother me." It was a lie. Her father was an accountant, but Brad didn't need to know that. The hesitation on Brad's face increased. He looked at his friends, then back at Claire. "This isn't over, Harrington," he said, pointing at Daniel. "I'll see you around." And then, to Claire's immense relief, they left. Daniel let out the breath he was holding. Army veteran? Accountant. but I thought that wouldn't have the same impact. You're an incredible liar. That's a compliment, I think. Save your strength. We still have to get out of here. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Claire's life. She kept Daniel leaning on her, her eyes always checking if Brad and his friends hadn't come back. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Every noise made her heart race. You're shaking, Daniel observed. I'm cold. Lie. All right, I'm terrified. Satisfied? Why didn't you leave me there? He asked, genuinely curious. You don't know me. It wasn't your fight. Claire thought for a moment. Because nobody deserves to be left behind, especially when they're hurt. Daniel didn't respond, but something changed in his gaze. Finally, headlights appeared on the street. An old blue car that had seen better days stopped beside them. The door opened, and a man in his 50s jumped out. Gray hair, dad belly, and an expression of pure concern. Claire, what happened? Are you okay? I'm fine, Dad. But he's not. Claire's father looked at Daniel, assessing the situation in a second. Get in the car, he said, without hesitation. Both of you. Now. Sir, I don't want to cause any trouble, Daniel began. Son, you can barely stand. Get in the car. It wasn't a request. Claire helped Daniel get into the back seat and then got in beside him. Her father was already starting the engine. Where to? He asked. Home, Claire responded. The car took off, leaving the campus behind. Daniel leaned his head against the seat, his eyes closing from exhaustion. Your father actually came, he murmured. I told you he would. Most parents would ask questions first. My dad isn't most dads. Claire's father looked in the rearview mirror. The questions come later, son. First, we take care of you. Daniel opened his eyes and met the man's gaze in the mirror. Thank you, sir. Call me Robert. And don't thank me yet. My wife is going to make you eat at least 3 plates before letting you rest, and she'll want to know every detail of what happened. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Claire laughed softly. I warned you my family was intense. Daniel looked out the window, watching the campus lights disappear in the distance. Intense sounds good, he said, almost to himself. Intense sounds very good. The car continued through the night, taking Daniel away from everything he knew, and toward a simple house where he would discover, for the first time in his life, what it meant to be welcomed without questions, without judgment, and without expecting anything in return. The car parked in front of a house that seemed to have come out of a Christmas card. Small, with lit windows, and a garden that clearly received more love than most mansions Daniel knew. And on the porch, a woman with brown hair and a floral apron waited with her arms crossed. That's my mom, Claire said. Prepare yourself. For what? For everything. The car door had barely opened when Claire's mother was already beside them, analyzing Daniel as if he were a puzzle that needed to be solved immediately. Good heavens, she exclaimed. What happened to this boy, Robert? What did you bring home? A young man who needed help, Margaret. The father responded calmly. I can see he needs help. The question is, who did this to him? Ma'am, Daniel tried. Shh, Margaret cut him off. You don't talk. You come in, sit down, and let me take care of you. Questions later. Daniel looked at Claire, completely lost. I warned you, she said, shrugging. The next 15 minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Margaret led Daniel inside the house like a general leading troops, sat him in a kitchen chair, and began gathering what seemed to be the entire contents of the first aid cabinet. Alcohol, she muttered, opening drawers. Cotton. Ointment. Where's that ointment? Robert, did you touch the ointment? I've never touched any ointment in my life. Someone touched it. It was here yesterday. Maybe it ran away, Robert suggested. Ointments do that sometimes. Margaret shot her husband a look that could freeze the sun. Found it, she announced triumphantly, raising a tube as if it were a trophy. Now, young man, this is going to sting a little. That's fine, I can handle it, Daniel said. He couldn't handle it. Ow, I said it would sting. You said a little. That wasn't a little. That was. Effective, Margaret completed. Done. Now the lip. Daniel looked at Claire in panic. She's going to touch my lip? With great care, Claire responded, clearly enjoying herself. Her care hurts. I'm listening, Margaret said. And yes, my care hurts. But it works. Now stay quiet. Daniel stayed quiet. It was safer that way. While Margaret worked, Robert was preparing something at the sink. The smell of coffee began to fill the kitchen, mixing with the aroma of something in the oven. You were cooking? Daniel asked, trying not to move his face too much. It's almost 11 at night. I always have something in the oven, Margaret responded. You never know when someone is going to need food. She means it. Claire confirmed. Once, the mailman mentioned he was hungry and left here with 3 containers of soup. He was too skinny, Margaret justified. Mailmen need energy. They walk a lot. Daniel didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This family was completely different from everything he knew. Done, Margaret announced, taking a step back to admire her work. You're going to survive? Thank you, ma'am. Margaret? Call me Margaret. Ma'am makes me feel old. You are old, dear? Robert commented, bringing the coffee cups. Robert Whitman, I'm the same age as you. Yes, but I've aged with grace. You've aged with baldness. That too. Claire covered her face with her hands, but Daniel could see she was smiling. Are they always like this? He asked quietly. 25 years of marriage, Claire responded. This is love. It looks like a war. It's the same thing, apparently. Margaret placed a plate in front of Daniel. Chicken pot pie, still warm, with a generous portion of mashed potatoes on the side. Eat, she ordered. I'm not very hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry. I asked if you were going to eat. Those are different things. Daniel looked at the plate, then at Margaret, then at the plate again. Yes, ma'am. Margaret? Yes, Margaret. He took the first bite, and almost cried. This is, he began, his voice faltering. This is the best thing I've ever eaten. Margaret smiled, satisfied. It's my mother's recipe. 60 years of tradition. Don't exaggerate, dear, Robert said. It's 58. Robert. Shutting up. Daniel ate. He ate more than he thought he was capable of, considering the state of his stomach. But each bite seemed to heal something beyond hunger, something he didn't even know was broken. So, Margaret said, sitting at the table with her own cup of coffee, do you want to tell me what happened, or would you prefer I make up a story? Mom, Claire warned. What? I'm just asking. Politely. Daniel set his fork on the plate. I got involved in a fight at the party, he said. I didn't start it, but I also wasn't smart enough to leave before it got worse. And your friends? I don't have many friends. Not really. The silence that followed was gentle, not awkward. Margaret and Robert exchanged a look that Daniel couldn't decipher. Well, Margaret said finally, you have them now. Daniel blinked. What? Friends, you have them now, us. She pointed to herself, to Robert, and to Claire. 3 new friends. 4 if you count the cat, but he's antisocial, so maybe he doesn't count. You have a cat? As if summoned, a ball of white fur jumped onto the table and began sniffing Daniel's plate. Milo, Claire exclaimed. Get down from there. The cat looked at her with absolute contempt and continued sniffing. Wisco, he doesn't obey me, Claire explained. He doesn't obey anyone, Robert added. We just live in his house. Daniel, without thinking, extended his hand and scratched behind the cat's ear. Milo immediately began to purr. Wait, Claire said, shocked. He's purring. He never purrs. That cat scratched me 3 times this week, Robert complained. And for the stranger he purrs? Animals sense things, Margaret said, wisely. Milo knows this boy needs affection. Daniel continued petting the cat, feeling something strange in his chest. Something warm, something he couldn't name. After dinner, Margaret insisted that Daniel spend the night. You're in no condition to go anywhere, she declared, already arranging the couch with blankets and pillows. Tomorrow morning, after breakfast, we'll figure out how you get back to campus. I can call a taxi. You can accept the hospitality and say thank you. Daniel swallowed hard. Thank you. You're welcome. Now lie down. He lay down. The couch was old, a bit sunken in the middle, and had probably seen better days, but it was the most comfortable place Daniel had ever been. The house gradually became quiet. Robert and Margaret went upstairs to their room. Claire stayed a bit longer, washing the cups at the sink. Claire? Daniel called softly. Yes? Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Claire dried her hands and walked over to him. My parents believe that kindness doesn't need a reason, she said, and I believe them. That's unusual. Maybe. But it's who we are. She pulled the blanket up a little higher. Rest, Daniel. Tomorrow the world will still be there, but at least you'll face it fed. Daniel smiled. It hurt a little, but it was worth it. Good night, Claire. Good night. She turned off the living room light and went upstairs. Daniel lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house. The soft purring of the cat who had decided to sleep at his feet. The tick-tock of a clock somewhere. The silence that wasn't empty but full of peace. He thought about his own home. The mansion with too many rooms and too little affection. The silent dinners where every word was measured. The constant pressure to be someone he didn't know if he wanted to be. And he thought about that strange, noisy, welcoming family that had opened their doors to a complete stranger without asking for anything in return. A tear rolled down his face. He didn't bother to wipe it away. For the first time in a long time, Daniel slept in peace. And upstairs, Claire looked through the window of her old room, thinking about the mysterious boy on the living room couch. She didn't know his last name, didn't know where he came from, knew nothing about him besides his first name and his major. But something told her that night was important, that this encounter meant something. She just didn't know what yet. The smell of bacon woke Daniel before the alarm clock he didn't have. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he felt something heavy on his chest and almost had a heart attack. It was Milo. The white cat was lying on top of him, staring at him with an expression that could only be described as, "You're in my house. Remember that." "Good morning to you too," Daniel muttered. Milo blinked slowly and didn't move. "Are you going to get off me?" Another blink. No movement. "Got it. I'll figure it out myself." Daniel managed to wiggle out from under the cat without knocking it over, which he considered a personal victory. His entire body ached, but it was a different pain from the night before. It was the pain of someone who had finally rested. "Oh, you're awake." Margaret's voice came from the kitchen. "Come eat before it gets cold." Daniel walked to the kitchen and stopped at the door. Impressed. The table was covered with food. Scrambled eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, orange juice, coffee, toast. It was the kind of breakfast he only saw in margarine commercials. "Who is all this for?" he asked. "For the four of us," Margaret responded, placing another plate on the table. "Ma'am, Margaret, this would feed an army." "Nonsense, you're in a growth phase." "I'm 23 years old." "Emotional growth phase, then. Sit down." Daniel sat down. Robert was already at the table, reading a newspaper with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up and smiled. "Sleep well?" "Better than in a long time," Daniel admitted. "The couch does that. It looks uncomfortable, but it has magical powers." "It's true," Claire said, appearing at the kitchen door. She was in pajamas, hair pulled up in a messy bun, and looked completely different from the determined girl of the night before. "I used to sleep on that couch when I was a kid. Best sleep of my life. Until you fell off it and broke your grandmother's vase," Margaret added. "That vase was ugly." "It was a family heirloom." "An ugly heirloom?" Robert hid his laughter behind the newspaper. Breakfast was different from any meal Daniel had ever experienced. There was no awkward silence. There was no pressure to impress. There were no criticisms disguised as advice. There was just conversation. About the weather, about Robert's work at the accounting firm, about Claire's plans for the semester, about Milo's stubbornness in only eating one specific brand of food. "He's a cat," Daniel said, laughing. "How can he have a brand preference?" "Oh, you don't know Milo," Claire responded. "He's basically a food critic in feline form." "Once I bought the wrong brand," Robert added. "He looked at me with such contempt that I felt like I was being judged by a tribunal." "And what did you do?" "Went to buy the right brand, obviously. Who am I to argue with him?" Daniel laughed. A real laugh that made his lip protest, but that he couldn't contain. After breakfast, Margaret announced she was going to wash the dishes. Daniel stood up immediately. "Let me do it. You're a guest. I'm someone who ate enough for 3 people. The least I can do is wash the dishes." Margaret looked at him with a strange expression. Almost proud. "All right, but you wash, Claire dries." "Mom," Claire protested. "What?" He offered to help. "You can help too." Claire sighed dramatically but grabbed the dish towel without complaining. The two stood side by side at the sink. Daniel washed, Claire dried. The rhythm was natural, almost automatic. "So," Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence, "you never told me your last name." Daniel hesitated for a second. "You didn't tell me yours either." "Whitman, Claire Whitman." "Pretty name." "And yours?" Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by Robert, who appeared at the kitchen door. "Son, do I need to call someone to let them know you're okay?" The question was simple, but carried enormous weight. Daniel stopped washing. The suds dripped down his hands as he thought. "My father," he said finally. "He's probably worried." "Do you have the number?" Daniel recited the number from memory. Robert nodded and went to the living room to make the call. Claire noticed the change in Daniel's behavior. Is everything okay? It is. It's just that my father and I don't have the easiest relationship in the world. But he worries about you. In his own way, which usually involves impossible expectations and comparisons to my brother. Claire said nothing. She just continued drying the dishes, offering her silent presence as support. 20 minutes later, a car stopped in front of the house. It wasn't just any car. It was a black luxury car, shiny, the kind that clearly cost a small fortune. Completely out of place on that street of modest houses. Daniel looked out the window and felt his stomach sink. He came personally, he murmured. The car door opened and a man stepped out. Gray hair, impeccable posture, suit that had probably been custom-made. He walked to the front door with quick, almost urgent steps. Robert opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Harrington, I presume?" "Yes. Robert Whitman?" "That's me. Please come in." Daniel's father entered the house. His eyes immediately found his son, and something changed in his expression. The mask of control cracked for a second, revealing something Daniel rarely saw. Genuine concern. "Daniel," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Are you okay?" "I am, Dad." The man walked to his son and, to everyone's surprise, hugged him. Daniel was paralyzed for a moment. His father wasn't the hugging type. His father was the type who shook hands and gave pats on the back. But there he was, hugging his son in the middle of the living room of an unknown family. "I was worried," his father said quietly. When Mr. Whitman called explaining what happened, "Dad, I'm fine, really." The hug lasted a few more seconds. Then, Daniel's father composed himself, adjusting his suit as if he could smooth out the emotions along with the fabric. He turned to Robert and Margaret, who watched the scene in respectful silence. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, and his voice faltered slightly. "You welcomed my son without knowing him. Took care of him. That's more than most people would do." "Anyone would do the same," Margaret said. "No," Daniel's father shook his head. "Anyone would not. I know many people, Mrs. Whitman, and I can assure you that most would look the other way." His gaze then turned to Claire, who was standing a bit further away, watching the scene. "Mr. Whitman told me on the phone," he said, walking toward her. "It was you who found my son, who faced those boys, who called for help." Claire felt her face heat up. "I only did what any person—" "No," he interrupted her, his voice choked. "What you did was extraordinary. You didn't know Daniel, knew nothing about him, and yet you risked your safety to protect him." He held Claire's hands between his. "I have 2 sons, Miss Whitman, and even with all the money in the world, I cannot buy what you gave Daniel last night. Courage, compassion, humanity." The man's eyes were glistening. "You brought my son back to me. I will never forget this. Never." Claire didn't know what to say. She looked at Daniel, who was watching the scene with an expression she had never seen before. Pride, maybe, or gratitude, or something that mixed both. Claire began. "He needed help, and nobody else was helping. And that's exactly what makes you special," Daniel's father said. "In a world full of people who look the other way, you chose to look directly." He released her hands and turned to Robert and Margaret. "You raised an extraordinary daughter. You must be very proud." "We are," Robert said, putting his arm around Claire's shoulders. "Every day." Daniel's father took his wallet from his pocket. "Please, let me compensate you in some way." "Put that away," Robert interrupted, firmly but without harshness. "We didn't help your son expecting payment." "But—" "Mr. Harrington," Margaret said, taking a step forward, "the best way to thank us is by taking good care of that boy. He's special. Maybe you already know that, maybe you need to be reminded, but he is." Daniel's father was silent for a long moment. Then he put the wallet away. "You're right, I'm sorry." He looked at Daniel. "Shall we go?" Daniel nodded, but before leaving he turned to Claire. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." It was nothing. It was everything. They looked at each other for a moment. There was something there, something unsaid, something neither of them knew how to name. "Take care, Daniel," Claire said. "You too, Claire." There was no exchange of numbers, no promises to keep in touch. Just 2 names, one shared night, and a farewell that seemed more significant than it should be. Daniel walked to the car with his father. Before getting in, he looked one last time at the small house with lit windows. Claire was on the porch, waving. He waved back. And then the car left, taking Daniel back to his world of expectations and pressures. But something had changed. Something he would carry with him for the next 10 years, not knowing that the girl with the gentle smile and welcoming family would cross his path again. And when that happened, nothing would ever be the same. 10 years is a long time. Long enough to forget faces, voices, and nights that seemed important. Long enough to build entire lives in completely opposite directions. But some memories have the bad habit of not disappearing. 2 weeks after that night, Daniel graduated from law school. The ceremony was quick, pompous, and full of generic speeches about bright futures. His father applauded politely from the audience. Michael didn't come. Important meeting, as always. Daniel received his diploma, shook hands, and smiled for the photos. And at no point, in no hallway, at no celebration, did he cross paths with Claire Whitman. She was somewhere on that same campus, attending her freshman classes, working at the cafeteria, building her own story. But their paths simply didn't cross, as if fate had decided it wasn't time yet. A week after graduation, Daniel joined the Harrington Group as a junior attorney. The office was on the 28th floor, 4 floors below Michael, who already occupied an office with a view of all Manhattan. "Welcome to the family," Michael said on the first day, with that smile that never reached his eyes. "Try not to embarrass me. I'll do my best. Do more than that. Here, best is the minimum." Daniel learned quickly that the corporate world was a jungle. A jungle with central air conditioning and espresso machines, but still a jungle. Meetings were battlefields disguised as PowerPoint presentations. Every word was measured, every gesture calculated. Smiles were tools, not expressions of happiness. And Daniel adapted. He stored the memory of that night in a mental drawer and locked it with a key. Claire Whitman, the girl who had appeared out of nowhere, faced bullies and taken him to a house that smelled of bacon and unconditional love. Sometimes, on particularly difficult nights, he wondered what had happened to her. But he never looked to find out. Some things were better as memories. On the other side of the city, Claire was discovering that college was much harder without proper sleep. "You look like a zombie," Melissa observed, sitting next to her in the library. "Thank you. You look lovely today, too." "Seriously, Claire, how many hours did you sleep?" "Hours? That's measured in hours? I was counting in minutes." Melissa sighed. "You need to stop working so much. I need to pay for books, transportation, food. The scholarship doesn't cover everything, you know. But you're going to collapse before you graduate. At least I'll collapse with a full stomach. That's a win." The second year of college brought challenges Claire didn't expect. The scholarship covered tuition and the dormitory, but didn't cover books, transportation, food, and the thousands of small expenses that accumulated like ants at a picnic. She worked at the cafeteria in the morning, attended classes in the afternoon, and studied at night. On weekends, she did freelance typing jobs for professors who still hadn't figured out how to use a computer. "You're going to wear yourself out like this," her mother said during a phone call. "Mom, I'm fine." "You're lying. I can hear the dark circles in your voice. That doesn't even make sense." "It does to a mother. Come home this weekend. I'll make chicken pot pie." Claire went and ate 3 slices of pie while Milo purred on her lap, clearly satisfied to have his favorite human back. "So," Robert said casually, pretending to read the newspaper, "any interesting young men at college?" "Dad." "What? It's an innocent question." "There's no such thing as an innocent question coming from you." "She's right, dear," Margaret agreed. "You have the subtlety of an elephant in a crystal shop. I just want to know if my daughter is happy. I am happy, and single, and focused on my studies." "Too focused if you ask me," Robert muttered. "I didn't ask." "I know, but I told you anyway. It's my job as a dad." Claire rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Sometimes she thought about the boy from that night. Daniel, the law student with bad jokes and sad eyes. She never saw him on campus again. He had probably graduated and moved on with his life. She hoped he was okay. The years passed. Daniel rose through the hierarchy of the Harrington Group. Junior attorney became senior attorney, which became legal coordinator, which eventually became legal director. Each promotion came with more responsibilities, more pressure, and less time for anything that wasn't work. At 30, he had a penthouse apartment, an imported car, and a schedule so full he needed an assistant just to manage it. He also had chronic insomnia and an impressive collection of antacids. "You need a vacation," his assistant, a woman named Patricia who had the patience of a saint, suggested one day. Vacation? Daniel repeated, as if she had spoken in another language. What's that? It's when you don't work for a few days and do things that make you happy. That exists? For normal people, yes. Oh, well, I'm not normal. I'm a Harrington, Patricia sighed. That's not something to be proud of, Daniel. I know, but it's what I have. On the other side of the country, Claire was graduating. The ceremony was small, simple, and absolutely perfect. Her parents cried. Melissa screamed so loudly she was almost kicked out of the auditorium. And Claire held the diploma as if it were the most precious object in the universe. Because, in a way, it was. I did it, she whispered to herself. 4 years of work, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. 4 years of instant noodles and cold coffee. 4 years of exams, papers, and professors who seemed determined to make her give up. But she didn't give up. And now she had a degree in business administration with a specialization in humanized management. What exactly is humanized management? Robert asked at the celebration dinner. It's an approach that puts people at the center of business decisions, Claire explained. Instead of treating employees as numbers, you treat them as human beings. That sounds like common sense. You'd be surprised how many companies don't have common sense, Dad. Claire got a job at a small consulting firm. The salary was modest, the office was cramped, and the coffee was terrible. But the work was meaningful. She helped companies improve their management practices, to listen to their employees, to create environments where people wanted to be, not where they were forced to stay. You're good at this, her boss, a gentleman named Arthur, who wore funny ties and had a bigger heart than anyone Claire knew, said one day. You have a gift for seeing what companies need. I just listen to people, Claire responded. Usually, they know exactly what's wrong. They just need someone to ask. The years continued to pass. Daniel became known in the corporate world as the most efficient legal director in the industry. He closed contracts with surgical precision, resolved disputes before they became lawsuits, and kept the Harrington Group away from any legal trouble. Michael, now CEO, rarely praised him. You're doing your job, was the most he would say. That's what you're paid for. Daniel learned not to expect more than that. Claire, meanwhile, was building a different reputation. She was known as the consultant who really cared, who didn't sell generic solutions but listened to each company, each employee, each problem. At 28, she had a list of loyal clients, a small but cozy apartment, and the same crazy family that kept trying to set her up with any single man who crossed their path. The neighbor's son is available, Margaret informed her during a Sunday lunch. Mom, the neighbor's son is very old. So what? Age is just a number. A pretty big number in this case. You're too picky. I have standards. Your standards are going to make you end up alone with 20 cats. That would be an improvement. Cats don't try to marry me off to strangers. Milo, who was on Claire's lap, meowed in approval. 10 years. 10 years since that night when two strangers crossed paths at a party that ended in chaos. 10 years without any contact, any message, any chance encounter in life's hallways. Daniel sometimes thought about her. The girl with the ponytail who had faced bullies for him. The family that had welcomed him without questions. The couch that had magical powers and the white cat that only purred for strangers. But they were just passing thoughts, memories of a life that seemed to belong to another person. Claire sometimes thought about him too. The injured boy who made jokes even when he was clearly suffering. The look of surprise when her family treated him with kindness. The silent goodbye that never included a last name. But they were just distant memories, stories from a time when she still didn't know who she would become. Both moved on, both built their lives. Both believed that night had been just an isolated episode, a momentary crossing of paths that would never meet again. But fate, as always, had other plans. Back to the 32nd floor. Back to the conference room. Back to the exact moment when Michael Harrington's world began to crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. The documents trembled in his hands. Or maybe it was his hands that trembled. It was hard to tell. This is a fraud, Michael said, but his voice no longer had the conviction of before. It has to be a fraud. Claire remained silent. She had learned over the years that sometimes silence was more powerful than any argument. Henderson, who until that moment had been the biggest supporter of the laughter, leaned over the table trying to read the documents. Mr. Harrington, what exactly is written there? Michael didn't respond. "Mr. Harrington? It's my father's will," Daniel said, finally managing to see the content over his brother's shoulder. A will that apparently none of us knew about. The room exploded in murmurs. Will? Thompson, the financial director, almost choked on his own air. But the original will was read 3 years ago when Mr. Harrington Sr. He stopped, realizing he was about to say something inappropriate. "When he passed away," Claire completed, without emotion. "Yes, but this is an addendum, a codicil to be more precise, registered 6 months earlier at a different notary office with different witnesses." "And why on earth would he do that?" Michael exploded. "I would suggest you ask him, but—" Claire paused. "Anyway, the document speaks for itself." Daniel took the papers from his brother's hands. Michael was too paralyzed to protest. His eyes scanned the lines. Each word seemed more surreal than the last. "I, Edward Harrington, being of sound mind, declare that all of my shares in the Harrington Group be transferred to Claire Elizabeth Whitman." Daniel stopped reading. Claire Elizabeth Whitman. Claire. He raised his eyes and looked at her. Really looked for the first time since she had walked into that room. The brown hair, the calm eyes, the firm but not arrogant posture. And suddenly, like lightning striking through an entire decade, he remembered. The party, the confusion, the girl who had appeared out of nowhere and asked if he was okay, the simple house, the chicken pot pie, the white cat that only purred for strangers. "Claire?" he whispered, so quietly he barely made a sound. She looked at him, and for a second, just 1 second, something passed through her eyes. Recognition, surprise, and maybe, just maybe, a flash of joy. But she said nothing. She just gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "This doesn't make sense," Michael continued, apparently oblivious to the silent exchange between Claire and Daniel. "Why would our father leave the company to a complete stranger?" "I wasn't a stranger to him," Claire answered calmly. "Oh no? And who exactly were you?" "Someone he met many years ago. Someone he trusted." "Trusted? More than his own children?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was in the documents. Henderson cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Harrington? Michael? Perhaps we should call our legal team to analyze." "I am the legal team," Daniel interrupted, still holding the papers. "Or at least part of it, and these documents seem legitimate." Michael turned to his brother as if he had just committed treason. "You're on her side?" "I'm on the side of truth, and the truth is that this signature is our father's. This seal is authentic. These witnesses are verifiable." "Then verify it. Call them. Prove this is fake." "Michael," Daniel said, with a calm he didn't feel, "what if it's not fake?" The silence that followed was deafening. Claire took the moment to continue. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling another document from the folder. "A specific clause about the leadership structure." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Of course there is. Why wouldn't there be? The will determines that the company presidency be shared." "Shared?" Henderson repeated. "Between whom?" Claire looked directly at Daniel. "Between me as majority owner and Daniel Harrington as the representative of the values that the founder believed were essential for the future of the company." The entire room turned to Daniel, who turned to Michael, who looked like he was about to have a breakdown. "This is," Michael started. "Crazy?" Thompson suggested. "Absurd?" Henderson added. "Legal," Daniel said, still reading the document. "This is completely legal and binding." Michael took a step back, as if he had been hit by an invisible punch. "You," he pointed at Daniel, "you knew about this?" "What? Of course not. You know this woman." "I never." Daniel stopped, because technically, he did know her, or had known her, 10 years ago. "It's complicated." "Complicated? Complicated." "Mr. Harrington," Claire intervened, "I understand this is a lot to process, and I don't expect any decisions to be made today. But the documents are valid. The transfer has already been registered, and starting tomorrow, I officially take over as owner of this company." She closed the folder. "You have 24 hours to consult your own lawyers, verify the authenticity of the documents, and accept reality. Or not accept it. The choice is yours. But reality isn't going to change." Claire walked toward the door. "Wait," Daniel called out. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "We need to talk," he said. "I know, but not here. Not now." And then she left, leaving behind a room full of executives in shock, a dethroned CEO, and a legal director who had just discovered that fate had a very, very peculiar sense of humor. Michael let himself fall into a chair. "This isn't happening," he murmured. "This can't be happening." Daniel looked at the door through which Claire had left. 10 years. 10 years since that night. And somehow, impossibly and inexplicably, she had returned. Not as a memory, not as a ghost from the past, but as the new owner of everything he knew. Henderson cleared his throat. "So, is the meeting adjourned?" No one answered. Because at that moment, as silence dominated the 32nd floor, a single question echoed in everyone's mind. How exactly had a simple woman from an ordinary family become the heir of one of the most powerful men in America? And more importantly, what had their father seen in her that he hadn't seen in his own children? Michael Harrington had spent 37 years building a fortress of arrogance. In exactly 45 minutes, that fortress had turned to dust. And the worst part? He hadn't even been able to finish his PowerPoint presentation. 2 hours after Claire's departure, the conference room still felt like a battlefield. The executives had gradually dispersed, each one inventing more creative excuses than the last. "I need to check some reports," Henderson said. "I have an urgent call," Thompson murmured. "My dog is sick," someone in the back ventured. "You don't even have a dog, Phillips," Michael growled. "I'm going to buy one. Excuse me." Within minutes, only the two brothers remained. Michael was sitting at the head of the table, the place that had always been his by right, except now, apparently, it wasn't anymore. "You need to calm down," Daniel said. "Calm down? Calm down?" Michael stood up so fast the chair almost tipped over. "A woman appears out of nowhere, steals our family's company, and you want me to calm down?" "She didn't steal it. Dad left it to her. Which is even worse. Why would he do that? Why leave everything to a stranger instead of his own children?" Daniel remained silent. "And you," Michael pointed at him. "You know her, don't you? I saw the way you two looked at each other." "Michael." "Don't lie to me, Daniel. Not now." Daniel sighed. "I met her once, 10 years ago. It was a long story." "Then tell me, we have time." "Apparently, I don't have anything else to do anymore anyway." Before Daniel could answer, the door to the room opened. Patricia, Daniel's assistant, entered carrying an envelope. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, clearly wishing she were anywhere else on the planet, "but this just arrived from your father's attorney's office. Apparently, it was part of the will's instructions. It was only supposed to be delivered after Miss Whitman presented the documents." She placed the envelope on the table and practically ran out. The two brothers looked at the envelope as if it were a trap about to go off. "You open it," Michael said. "Why me?" "Because I've had enough surprises for today." Daniel picked up the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he tore open the seal. Inside there was a letter, handwritten in their father's unmistakable handwriting. Daniel began to read aloud. "My sons, if you're reading this, it means Claire Whitman has finally received what belongs to her, and it means you're probably confused, angry, or both. Let me explain. Many years ago, when Daniel was still in college, I received a phone call. A man named Robert Whitman told me that his daughter had found my son hurt at a party, stood up to bullies to protect him, and brought him to her home, where her family took care of him as if he were one of their own. I went to pick up Daniel from that house, and what I found changed my perspective on everything. I found a family that had almost nothing but offered everything. I found people who helped without expecting anything in return. I found an 18-year-old girl with more courage and compassion than most of the executives I knew. In the years that followed, I kept in touch with the Whitman family. Discreetly, I followed Claire's journey. I watched her graduate, struggle, grow. I watched her build a career based on values that I, honestly, never managed to teach my own children. Michael, you were brilliant. But somewhere along the way you confused leadership with domination. You confused respect with fear. You built an empire, but you forgot that empires are made of people, not numbers. Daniel, you always had the right heart, but you never had the courage to use it. You hid behind your brother, let him make the decisions, and settled for being the shadow when you could have been the light. I made many mistakes as a father. I pushed too hard, I compared too much, I demanded too much, and in the process, I created one arrogant son and one resigned one. Claire represents what this company should be: humanity, empathy, strength without cruelty. Daniel represents what this company can still become: justice, balance, the bridge between what we are and what we should be. Together, They can transform the Harrington Group into something I could finally be proud of. Michael, I'm not punishing you. I'm setting you free. You don't need to carry this weight alone. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to learn to be human again. I know you'll resist. You'll fight. You'll question. But deep down, you know I'm right. Because if I had left this company in both your hands, it would have survived. But it wouldn't have lived. With love, even though I was never good at showing it, Edward Harrington. P.S. Michael, stop yelling at the interns. They're afraid of you. That's not leadership, it's intimidation. Daniel finished reading. The silence that followed was the heaviest that room had ever witnessed. Michael was motionless. His face had gone through all the stages: anger, disbelief, pain. Now it was just empty. Intimidation, he repeated with a bitter laugh. Even when he's not here anymore, he criticizes me. Michael. No. He raised his hand. Don't say anything. I need a moment. He walked to the window, looking at the city below. All those people, all those lives, all those stories. And him, at the top of a building that was no longer his, realizing that maybe it never had been. He was right, wasn't he? Michael said quietly. About me. About everything. Daniel approached. He was also wrong about many things. He was never the perfect father. But he saw what I became, and he didn't like it. Michael, you can still change. This isn't the end. No? Michael turned around. His eyes were red. I lost the company, Daniel. I lost the respect of my employees. I lost everything. You didn't lose everything. You still have a brother who, despite everything, cares about you, even when you make it very difficult. Michael let out a weak laugh. I make it very difficult? You're literally the most difficult person I know, huh? And I work with lawyers. Is that an insult or a compliment? I'm still deciding. The two stood in silence for a moment. So, Michael finally said, are you going to accept the shared presidency? Daniel thought about the letter, about their father's words, about Claire. I don't know yet. This is a lot. It is, Michael agreed. It's a lot. He looked at the envelope on the table. Do you think she knew, Claire? About Dad, about all of this? I don't know, but I think we need to find out. Michael nodded slowly. Then go. Talk to her. Find out what she wants, what she's planning. And you? Michael looked around the conference room, the stage of so many victories, the scene of his greatest defeat. I'm going to stay here for a while, thinking about what Dad said, trying to decide if I stay angry or if he paused, or if I finally listen. Daniel placed his hand on his brother's shoulder. He loved you, Michael, in his twisted way, but he loved you. I know. Michael's voice cracked. That's the problem. He loved me enough to tell me the truth, and the truth hurts. Daniel left the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. Claire Whitman's first official day as owner of the Harrington Group began with her getting lost in her own building, 3 times, in less than an hour. Excuse me, she stopped an employee in the hallway. Where is the president's office? The man looked at her as if she had asked where the moon was. 32nd floor, but you need authorization to. I'm the new owner. The man went pale. Oh, it's that way. The gold elevator, not the silver one. The silver one goes to the parking garage. Why do you have 2 elevators of different colors? Nobody knows. It's tradition. Claire sighed. She had been there for 40 minutes and had already discovered that big companies operated based on traditions that no one questioned and rules that no one understood. When she finally reached the 32nd floor, Daniel was already waiting. You got lost, he said, not as a question. 3 times. The silver elevator? The silver elevator. Everyone falls for that on the first day. It's almost an initiation ritual. You should put up signs. I suggested that 5 years ago. Michael said signs were for weak companies. Claire blinked. Signs are for weak companies? Welcome to the Harrington Group. The first official meeting was a glorious disaster. Claire sat at the head of the table, her table now technically, and looked at the 12 executives who stared at her with a mixture of curiosity, distrust, and poorly disguised terror. Good morning, she said. I'm Claire Whitman. You've probably heard of me. Henderson cleared his throat. We were at the meeting yesterday. Oh, yes, the meeting where you laughed at me. The silence was deafening. Relax, Claire continued. I don't hold grudges. Much. Daniel, seated to her right, hid a smile. So, Claire opened a folder. I spent the night reading the financial reports from the last 3 years, and I have some questions. Thompson, the financial director, straightened up in his chair. Of course, Miss Whitman. We're at your service. Great. First question, why do you spend $200,000 a year on corporate image consulting? It's to maintain the company's image. And what exactly do these consultants do? They consult about image. I see, and the results? Thompson opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. They made a very nice report, a $200,000 report with colorful graphs. Claire looked at Daniel. Is this normal? Unfortunately, yes. Second question, Claire continued. Why don't the employees on the ground floor have access to the cafeteria on the 10th floor? Henderson frowned. Because the cafeteria on the 10th floor is for executives. And is the food different? No, but the chairs are better. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. You segregate employees by chair quality? When you put it that way, it sounds bad. That's because it is bad. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Claire questioned everything. Unnecessary expenses, absurd hierarchies, policies that existed because it's always been that way. The executives left looking like they had just run a marathon. You were intense, Daniel said afterward, when only the two of them remained in the room. I was honest. There's a difference. For this company, it's the same thing. Claire leaned back in her chair, massaging her temples. Tell me it's going to get better. It will. Eventually, maybe, probably not. You're terrible at motivation. I'm a lawyer. Motivation isn't part of the curriculum. Claire laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since she'd walked into that building. Can I ask you something? Daniel said after a moment of silence. Go ahead. Why did you accept? The inheritance, the company, all of this. You could have refused. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Your father came to me 3 years ago, she finally said. He showed up at my office without warning and told me about his plan. And you agreed? Just like that? No. I told him he was crazy, that I wasn't qualified, that his sons would hate me. Accurate assessment, Daniel admitted, but he insisted. He came back a week later, and again and again. For 6 months, he showed up every Friday with coffee and new arguments. My father did that? The man who didn't have the patience to even wait for the elevator? That's the one. Claire smiled slightly. In the end, he told me about you, about that night, about how that moment had shown him that there were people in the world who helped without expecting anything in return. Daniel swallowed hard. He said the company needed someone like that. Someone who saw people, not numbers. Someone who reminded everyone that business is done by human beings, not machines. And you accepted because of that? I accepted because he made me a promise. What promise? Claire looked directly at him. He promised I wouldn't be alone, that you would be by my side, that together we could transform this place into something better. Daniel didn't know what to say. He talked about you a lot, you know, Claire continued. He said you were the son who had the right heart, but never had the space to show it. That sounds like my father, compliments disguised as criticisms. Or criticisms disguised as compliments, depends on the angle. The two were silent for a moment. So, Daniel finally said, are we really doing this? Shared presidency, corporate transformation, all this craziness? It looks like it. You know it's going to be hard, right? People don't change easily. Companies even less so. I know, Claire smiled. But I faced bullies to save a stranger 10 years ago. I think I can handle some executives afraid of change. Daniel laughed. You're never going to let me forget that night, are you? Never. It's my trump card. Fair enough. They looked at each other for a moment. There was something there, a connection that transcended business and wills, a story that had begun 10 years ago, and that, apparently, hadn't ended yet. Claire, Daniel said with a strange expression on his face. Yes? I never properly thanked you. For that night, for everything you did. You thanked me, at the time. No, I said thank you, but I never showed you how much it meant. Claire felt her face warm slightly. Well, she said, trying to keep her tone light, you have plenty of time now. We're going to be working together for quite a while. That's true. Daniel smiled. And speaking of working together, do you have plans for lunch? Depends. Is the executive cafeteria still segregated by chairs? Officially, until you change it. Then let's have lunch in the ground floor cafeteria, with the real employees. You really want to cause a scandal on your first day? Daniel said. Claire stood up, grabbing her folder. Daniel, I walked into this company, faced your brother, and found out you spend $200,000 on reports with colorful graphs. Having lunch on the ground floor is the least of the scandals. She walked toward the door. Are you coming or not? Daniel stood up, smiling. I wouldn't miss this for anything. And as the two walked together down the hallway, passing employees who whispered and pointed, something new was beginning to grow. Something that, if everything went right, would change not only a company but two lives that fate insisted on intertwining. 3 months later, the Harrington Group was an unrecognizable company. And Claire Whitman had made a decision no one expected. You want to do what? Daniel almost dropped his coffee. Transfer the executive presidency to you. Claire, this is necessary. They were in the office they had shared for the past months, the same office where they had debated strategies, laughed at absurd situations, and, without realizing it, built something much bigger than a professional partnership. Let me explain, Claire said, sitting on the edge of the desk. Your father gave me this company for a reason. He wanted someone to bring humanity here. And I did. But he also wanted something else. What? For you to finally step out of the shadows. Daniel was silent. In the last 3 months, Claire continued, you stepped out of Michael's shadow, but you stepped into mine. Everyone sees me as the leader, the owner, the revolutionary, and you stay beside me, supporting me, exactly as you did with your brother. That's not true. Yes, it is, and we both know it. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but stopped. Because she was right. As always. Your father didn't choose me to run this company forever, Claire said softly. He chose me to prepare it for you. Claire? I read his letter about 50 times, Daniel, and I finally understood. He said you were the bridge between what we are and what we should be. Bridges don't stay hidden. Bridges hold everything up. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. And you? What would you be? Claire smiled. I would be your partner, your advisor, the person who reminds you every day that leadership isn't about power, it's about people. She paused. And maybe, if you don't mess everything up, something more. Something more? Don't get too excited. I'm still deciding. Daniel laughed, but his eyes were shining. Are you sure about this? Absolutely. This company needs a Harrington in charge. A real Harrington. One who understands that their father's legacy wasn't about money or power. It was about doing the right thing. And that Harrington is me? No, it's Michael. Claire held back her laugh for 2 seconds. Of course it's you, silly. The special assembly took place a week later. Shareholders, executives, and employees packed the main auditorium. Rumors had circulated through the entire building. Some said Claire was going to sell the company. Others bet on a merger. Henderson had a theory involving aliens that no one took seriously. Claire took the stage first. Good morning, everyone. I know you're curious, so I'll be direct. That would be a first, someone murmured from the back. I heard that, Henderson. Nervous laughter ran through the auditorium. 3 months ago, I walked into this company as owner, a stranger that nobody knew, with a folder of documents and a lot of stubbornness. You laughed at me. She looked directly at Henderson, some more than others. Henderson sank into his chair. But in these 3 months, something incredible happened. This company changed. You changed. And I learned an important lesson about leadership. She paused. Leadership isn't about being on top. It's about putting the right people in the right places. And today, I'm doing exactly that. Claire turned to the side of the stage. Daniel, can you come up here? Daniel climbed up, visibly nervous. He had never liked the spotlight. But Claire briefly held his hand, and that was enough. Starting today, Claire announced, Daniel Harrington takes over as CEO of the Harrington Group. I will remain as vice president and strategic consultant. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the auditorium exploded. Applause, murmurs, some tears. Patricia, Daniel's assistant, was openly sobbing in the 3rd row. This is unexpected, Thompson said to no one in particular. This is right, Henderson responded, surprising himself. Daniel took the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't prepare a speech, he admitted. Honestly, I only found out about this a week ago and I'm still processing. Gentle laughter. But I know one thing. My father built this company from nothing. My brother transformed it into an empire. And Claire. He looked at her. Claire showed us that empires mean nothing if we don't take care of the people inside them. He took a deep breath. I spent my whole life in the shadows, first my brothers, then trying to prove my worth to a father who never seemed satisfied. But today, I understand what he really wanted. He wanted me to lead, not with arrogance like Michael did, not with fear like I did, but with balance, with justice, with humanity. I don't know if I'll succeed, but with Claire by my side, and with all of you, I'm gonna try, every single day. The applause that followed was deafening. On the other side of the city, Michael Harrington was packing his bags. He had watched the assembly by video conference. He had seen his brother take the stage, assume command, and finally become the leader he always should have been. And for the first time in years, Michael felt proud, not of himself, of his brother. "Where are you going?" Patricia asked, helping him close a particularly stubborn suitcase. "Italy, first. Then, who knows, the world is big. And the company." Michael smiled. A different smile, less arrogant, lighter. "The company is in good hands." He looked out the window. "My father said in the letter that he was setting me free. I didn't understand at the time. I thought it was a punishment. And now? Now I understand. He freed me from the weight of being who I wasn't, and he freed Daniel to be who he always was." Michael grabbed a pen and wrote a quick note. "Daniel, I watched the assembly. You were better than I ever was. Dad was right about you. About Claire, about everything. Take care of the company, take care of her, and for the first time in your life, take care of yourself too. Your brother, Michael. P.S. If you mess everything up, I'm coming back. And you know I'm unbearable when I'm right." 6 months later, on an autumn afternoon in Central Park, Daniel and Claire walked hand in hand. The leaves fell around them like golden confetti. The sun painted the sky orange and pink. And after so many months together, the silence between them was as comfortable as an embrace. "Claire?" "Yes?" Daniel stopped walking and turned to her. "I found an apartment." "Oh yeah?" Claire smiled. "And why are you telling me this with such a serious face?" "Because I want you to live with me." Claire was silent for a moment. "You're asking me to move in together?" "I am." Daniel held her hands. "I know we've been together for a short time, but at the same time, we've been together for 10 years. Since that night, since you decided to save a stranger without expecting anything in return." "Daniel, I love you, Claire, and I want to wake up next to you every day. I want to have breakfast with you. I want to argue about who forgot to buy milk. I want to build a life with you, a real life." Claire felt her eyes burn. "You want to argue about milk?" "Among other things," she laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, yes. I want to live with you. Yes, I want to wake up next to you. And yes, it's probably going to be you who forgets to buy the milk." Daniel pulled her into a kiss. Sweet, familiar, full of promises. "So," he said when they separated, "shall we go home?" "Let's go home." They walked together as the sun set over Manhattan. "And the wedding?" Of course, Claire said yes. A year later, in a simple ceremony in the Whitman family garden with Margaret crying in the front row, Robert pretending he had something in his eye, and Milo watching everything with his usual air of feline superiority. Michael returned from Europe especially to be the best man. He was tanned, lighter, and laughed genuinely for the first time in years when Daniel stumbled over his own words during the vows. "Some things never change," he whispered to Patricia, who was sitting next to him. "And others change completely," she replied, looking at the newlyweds. That night, as the guests danced and celebrated, Claire looked around, at her parents, who had taught her the value of kindness, at Michael, who had learned that losing sometimes means winning, at Daniel, her husband, who had finally found his place in the world. 3 destinies completely transformed, by a man in a suit and tie who, many years ago, had knocked on the door of a simple house to pick up his son, and had found much more than he expected. Edward Harrington never got to see the result of his plan, but somehow Claire knew he was watching, and that for the first time he was proud of everything, of everyone. Sometimes destiny places people in our path not by chance, but to remind us that true greatness isn't in the power we conquer, but in the heart we offer, and that the simplest gestures can transform entire lives. If you felt that too, leave in the comments what rating you'd give this story. And if you believe that everyone needs someone who sees the best in us, subscribe to the channel.